Alrighty, so I'm going to tell you a funny story. I don't know if the sound will come through in this or not. I just made another video in which I talked about some controversial things, and I noticed I'm uploading it now, but it looks like it's not going to have any sound. If it doesn't have any sound when I go to play it after I upload it, then I'll just delete it. But yeah, anyway, who knows why it's doing that? It could be that YouTube doesn't like the subject matter, or it could be some other glitch. Who knows? Anyway, we'll see if this one will work though, as well. Um, I'm going to tell you a story. This story goes way back to 1980, so we're going back now 45 years. I was 12 years old in 1980. I'm 57 now. But my parents, they split up when I was 12, and myself and my sister, who was a toddler at the time, and our mother, we all ended up in Eganville. I told that story in other videos, how we ended up staying in a haunted convent. And I went to the school next door to the Catholic, or what we used to call separate school in those days. And about Mrs. White, the teacher, who didn't like me, and so on like that. It was kind of mean going. Anyway, introduced me to the class as the son of one of those whores next door who caused the nuns, the sisters, to have to leave their home. Because, see, that was a decommissioned Grey Nuns convent where we were staying. And the Grey Nuns had decommissioned it because they couldn't afford to maintain it anymore, to heat it and whatnot. They were a dying order. And so what they did is they combined the Eganville convent and the Renfrew convent. And so they all moved to Renfrew because the Renfrew convent was half empty, and so was the Eganville convent. So it was a cost-saving thing is what it was anyway. They couldn't justify keeping two big buildings on the go and paying all the expenses of them when they were a dying order. Anyway, that's what had happened. But we were in Eganville for a while, and then eventually a bed opened up closer to home. There weren't very many shelters like that in those days. It was a fairly new thing back then, you know. We ended up anyway at Interval House in Carleton Place. Now, in Eganville, where we were, was a place in the convent that was called Avoca House, and it was run by a charitable organization known as the Avoca Foundation. But we ended up in Carleton Place at Interval House. There still is an Interval House in Carleton Place. It's not at the location where we were. We were in a rundown, ramshackle old house that was all bat infested and rat and mouse infested and stuff on Mary Street in Carleton Place. It's in a different location now. I don't really know where. I don't think they really publicize where it is too much for obvious reasons. Anyway, back then, though, it was on Mary Street in Carleton Place, in the town of Carleton Place, which at that time was a small town. It was like 5,000 population. It was smaller than the town of Perth that I came from, which had a 6,000 population. Anyway, when we were there were different people there with us. One of the people who was there, this is kind of a funny story in a way. It won't be funny, the whole thing won't be funny, but sure, one part of it is quite funny. Anyway, when we were there were different people there. There were different women there with their children. And there was one woman there, and she was Lebanese, and she had two children. She had two young children with her. They were younger than I was. I was 12. They were quite a bit younger than I was. And they were just little kids. One of them was named B-Sam. That was the boy, B-Sam. And the little girl, who was younger than the little boy, was named Ipsam. So there was B-Sam and Ipsam. Those were the children anyway. And the woman's name, the mother of these two children, her name was Manura. That was her name, Manura. And of course, we didn't see very many foreign people in those days. It was a little different for us to be around people from other cultures and whatnot. But it was interesting anyway. Anyway, this lady, Manura, she was there with her children, and the reason she was there was her husband, who was also Lebanese. They'd immigrated from Lebanon together. Her husband used to beat her up, and I guess she decided she was going to leave, and that's how she ended up at Interval House in Carleton Place. They actually lived in the city of Ottawa at the time, which is about 50 miles away. Anyway, Manura's husband owned a restaurant in Ottawa. And I guess it was a pretty good little restaurant that he had there and stuff, and he was a pretty good cook and so on, and he had a pretty good little business there. But anyway, of course, he was a typical Lebanese man. He had very thick black hair. And he was very particular about his hair. He was very proud of his hair, and he was very particular about it. And in the kitchen, he used to keep a can of hairspray on a shelf. And every so often, he'd take the can of hairspray down and he'd spray his hair, and stuff. And like he was always combing his hair and spraying his hair with hairspray and stuff. And he was very proud of his thick black hair. And he was very much, that it had to be just perfect. He couldn't have a hair out of place. And so he had his can of hairspray, and this is what he'd do. Several times throughout the day, he'd comb his hair and he'd spray it, Of course, I suppose in the kitchen with the heat and the steam and everything else, it'd be a job where your hair might get out of whack, Hey, you. Hi, Rocky. Oh, there he goes. He likes to run. He's pretty cute. Anyway, so, I suppose he had several occasions every day, where he felt like his hair just wasn't as good as it should be, and he needed to correct it. And so he would, like I say, he'd comb his hair, and he'd take this can down off the shelf there, give his hair a good spray to keep everything in place. And this was just a regular thing for him anyway. Well, one day, I'll tell you what happened. She told us this story. It was kind of comical in a way. One day, he pulls the can of hairspray down off the shelf, combs his hair, and he pulls the can of hairspray down, and he's spraying his hair, and all of a sudden, he drops the can on the floor, and he starts to scream. And he runs out of the kitchen into the restaurant, into the dining room. And he's running around the dining room, and he's got his hands on his head, and he's screaming, "Oh my God, my hair, my hair." Now, here's the thing, though, that happened. He kept the oven cleaner on the shelf beside the hairspray. Not paying attention, I suppose, just used to reaching up, grabbing the can and spraying his hair. He grabbed the wrong can. So he sprayed his hair with oven spray, sprayed his head with oven spray, with oven cleaning spray. And of course, oven cleaning spray, it'll literally eat the gunk that's baked on inside your oven. It'll literally eat that away. It's pretty powerful stuff anyway. You can imagine what it did to his hair and to his scalp and everything. But that's the story anyway. He reached up and he grabbed the wrong can, and I guess he ran out of the kitchen, dropped the can on the floor, and he ran out of the kitchen with his hands on his head, and just screaming bloody murder anyway. But yeah, there's a story for you. Anyway, that's it. Just thought I'd share that with you. Kind of comical in a way. Although I'm sure he didn't find it very funny at the time. Now, I don't know. I never heard a follow-up story. I don't know what happened after that. I don't know if his hair all fell out. I don't know if it grew back. I just don't know. But I'm sure he had some serious chemical burns, because that stuff is not to be messed around with. You don't want that stuff on your skin at all. Anyway, that's it. We'll talk to you later.